Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Hey everyone, welcome to Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. Today's show is presented by Ronald Blue Trust, one of our newer partners and sponsors with us here at Sports Spectrum. And listen, we are living in unprecedented economic times right now, right? And just a week or so ago, we had on a guest on the podcast to talk about sort of the weirdness of the economy and the impact. It was a really good interview with Don Christensen, and Don is one of the head guys over at Ronald Blue Trust. So definitely go back and listen to that podcast when you get a moment. But Ronald Blue Trust is here right now to answer questions and to help you all in your financial current situation. And they're great to work with. We love them. And we want to just direct you to their website, ronblue.com. Simple ronblue.com. Check them out. Learn more about what they stand for. Biblical principles. That's what they stand on. And they have a lot of great wisdom right now and questions, or answers, I should say, to questions that all of us are asking during this crazy time with the pandemic. But definitely check them out. Ronald Blue Trust and their website, ronblue.com. Today on the podcast, this is an interview that is kind of broken up into two parts. And our guest today is Greg Stier, and he is the founder of Dare to Share Ministries. Dare, the number 2, and then Share. He is fascinating, Greg, to me. He came to our offices in Denver back in, I want to say it was October or so, of 2019. And he visited with the Sports Spectrum team, sat us down in a room and kind of explained what Dare to Share was about and this new app called Life in 6 Words. And really what Greg is about, he started Dare to Share in 1991, and him and his team have equipped more than 1 million teenagers and others, but mostly focused on teens, to share their faith, to share the gospel. Dare to Share. Greg's also an author. He's authored 20 books, written countless articles, and he is a traveling evangelist. He preaches on stages across the nation, sharing about Dare to Share, sharing about his life story, which you'll hear on the show, which is a pretty crazy one about how he came to Christ and all the different people in his life that began a walk with the Lord. But really his heart right now is equipping people who are stuck in their house, quarantined, with tools to still evangelize and still tell others about Jesus. That's what we're called to do. We're called to love God and love others. And through that loving others, it calls us to share our faith, to go and make disciples, as the Great Commission says, as Jesus says in Matthew 28. And certainly where we are right now, it's weird. It's a crazy time. But Greg is going to join us and tell us about a great new tool that's happening within the app, Life in 6 Words, that can help you share your faith in a non-intrusive, in a non-forcing way with your friends and family who currently are not walking with the Lord. You're going to love this episode, this conversation with Greg Stier. He's a fun dude, and you'll enjoy his story. Take a listen to Greg Stier from Dare to Share, and he joins us today on Sports Spectrum. Greg, welcome to Sports Spectrum.
Man, glad to be on the show.
I'm so happy to have you, Greg. And the topic that I want to hit on, we're taping this, it's mid-April, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I just think sometimes, we're all sitting there and wondering, okay, what the heck's going on here, with this? And church is different, evangelizing is different, everything's different. What has this been like for you in the sense of just dealing with the pandemic from a perspective of you being Greg Stier, the person, not necessarily the Dare to Share side?
Well, it's been a time to really rethink how am I going to reach people with the gospel with, social distancing and gospel witnessing. Like, how do you do that? I mean, you could share Christ from 6 feet away,
right?
And using social media, but it really, it's been a time for us at Dare to Share and me personally to really rethink, how to communicate the gospel. And the good news is neighbors are out more than ever before. I've seen more neighbors in the last 2 months than I have in the last 2 years, because everybody's out and everybody's nervous because the very foundations of health, wealth, safety, everything a typical American trusts in is crumbling underneath us.
Yeah.
So it's time to point people to a firm foundation, which is we know Jesus Christ. So that's been for me is like, how do we do that effectively right now? How do I do that effectively? And then what tools and resources can we provide at Dare to Share to help others do that effectively?
Before we get into a little bit of the updated philosophy of Dare to Share right now, specifically while we're in quarantine, just share a little bit about what Dare to Share is and your thoughts behind why you started it.
I was, reached and really trained as a teenager. The guy who reached my family for Christ believed that teens came to Christ quicker and spread the gospel faster than adults. And so started Dare to Share with that in mind. How do we mobilize young people to share the gospel? And I equip, adults as well to share Christ. But, 80% of the people that come to Christ do it, by the time they're 18 years of age or so. And so that's why we did it. It's like, hey, if I'm going to go to a field, I want to go to the most fertile field I can to plant and sow. And teenagers are open to spiritual things, and Christian teenagers, I think, can be mobilized to reach other teenagers for the gospel. But again, we want to see everyone, every believer sharing their faith, and every non-believer have an opportunity to hear the gospel from a friend.
How have you seen over the years people who may have been afraid or apprehensive? I think that's one of the biggest fears for people is rejection or not being fully equipped. I don't know enough about the Bible. I don't know enough about God's word to be able to tell people about Jesus and evangelize. I'm not equipped. I'm not a pastor. I'm not, a seminary grad or whatever. How have you seen through the years of doing this ministry, people getting, I guess, more confidence to be able to do that and understanding that you don't need to be a pastor or, a seminary grad or a PhD or a doctor, to be able to share, the gospel?
Well, I think, when people begin to realize that, God has given them this same message, and God's planted them as a missionary in their neighborhood, at their jobs, at their schools, that they are the priest. 1 Peter 2:9 says you're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, that you may declare forth the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. That God has placed you as a priest and as a light in all those areas. And when things go bad, people look for the closest priest. When things turn dark, people look for the closest light.
Right.
And so believers, we are, priests before God and lights to the world. And it's time for us to shine the light, and share the hope. And as believers realize that and are empowered and equipped to articulate their faith, I think they can make so much of a difference, because they're working with people that a lot of times pastors and missionaries, evangelists will never connect with. But God has strategically placed everyone listening to this podcast somewhere to be a light.
And this is different, Greg, than sharing your faith on social media, which for me has always been sort of my comfort zone, right? And you get a little bit of a following. Both you and I have a little bit of a Twitter following, if you want to call it that. And it's a great way to put scripture on there and encourage people. But there's something else here that's more important, I think, and that's that face-to-face interaction, or that person-to-person connection that's vital in sharing the gospel, isn't there?
There really is. I mean, when you put out a post, it's great. It's kind of like declaring, "Hey, I'm a believer in Christ. I invite you to be one as well."
Yeah.
But when you engage with somebody personally in a conversation, whether that is through texting or face to face, it's different. Because you are addressing that person one on one, and you are leveraging that relationship to introduce them to the person that means the most to you, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Life in 6 Words is the app. And I know that, Greg, that this is an app that you actually came to Denver, Colorado, where PAO and Sports Spectrum is located, and you shared it with our team. And we were so impressed. And, you gave us these cards, and I still have my card at my home office here. I'm looking at it right now. Share, prayer, care, which you can explain in a second. And I know our team was so impressed that you came and you were at a conference that we were together just a couple months ago in February and talked even more about this. But now the pandemic has happened and the quarantining has happened, and you've kind of had to pivot a little bit on even the effectiveness of what this app is, at least right now. So start with, there's a two-part question here. What is the Life in Six Words app, and how have you even evolved just in the past few weeks, really, or days as we talk here in mid-April, on using this to strategize to help mobilize people to be able to share the gospel when they're stuck at home?
Yeah, so we developed the Life in Six Words app years ago, the original version. We did a video with Propaganda, Jason Petty, that explains the gospel. We did it for our conferences. It went viral, got like 3 million hits on YouTube. So we developed an app. We're like, hey, this whole life in 6 words, how do you explain the gospel in 6 words? God, our sins, paying everyone life, which actually spells out the acrostic gospel. And there's a sentence that goes with each. So it really explains the whole story of the gospel. So the Life in 6 Words app was developed to where you could ask somebody, hey, if you were to describe your life in 6 words, what would they be? They choose the words on your phone. And then you say, tell me why you chose those words, and you listen to their story. And then you say, can I share with you the 6 words that changed my life? And you walk through the gospel story. Just, what I tell people is if you can swipe and read, you can share the gospel. And so that was why we developed it. And I mean, we've had 20-something thousand downloads since October. Altogether, I think we're over 100,000 downloads between the former app and the new app. But then this pandemic hit. And we're like, okay, well, this app is not built for social distancing, because you have to actually get it in front of somebody and have them choose the words and touch your phone. And it just doesn't work right now. And so 3 weeks ago, we met with our app developer and say, how do we make this Life in 6 Words app pandemic proof? How can we have teenagers and adults sharing Christ from their own homes? And so they've been working hard. It released on Saturday. And I said, I'm going to be the first to fight, like a Marine, I want to first on the beach. So I sent it to 2 people. And basically what you do is there's an introduction slide. You send a person a text or a DM or an email that says, hey, I'd like to share with you the 6 words that changed my life. They push click. When they open, there's an introduction slide with your voice, because you've pre-recorded, Hey, Joe, or Jason, I wanted to share with you 6 words that changed my life. I'm a believer in Jesus, and this really kind of unpacks why I'm a believer in Christ. You can kind of give a mini version of your testimony. And then they go through each slide. God created us to be with him. Our sin separated us from God, the whole gospel, but your voice on each one explaining the gospel. So they just push play, and they see your face as an icon in the corner, and they see the slides from the app. They get all the way through. There's a conclusion slide that says, hey, I'd love to talk to you more about this. Let me know when you'd like to talk. And it's interesting. I sent it out to a server my wife and I had met at a restaurant. And within minutes, she texted me back. She didn't even finish. You can tell from your app how far they've gotten through. She only made it 13% through. And she said, would you please pray for me right now? And boom, we're in this conversation.
Wow.
3 hours later, I get a long text from a guy named Tristan, who works at the chiropractor place that my wife and I go to. And he just says, I want to talk. This has opened up my mind. We had a conference call yesterday, and now he's going to start online church with us, and then we're going to have a discipleship relationship after. This is since Saturday. So it is such a simple way for you to be personal and to engage in a gospel conversation and record and re-record it to get it right, and then send it out to you one by one, to your friends, family members, neighbors, classmates, teammates who don't know Christ. It's very personal, and it's very cool. It's a very interactive way to do it. And it's totally like the gospel. The Life in 6 Words app is free, right? Nice. And so we just want to make that available to everyone to use right now, especially in light of this, shelter-in-place laws.
We'll get back to our conversation with Greg Stier in just a little bit, but want to tell you about Ronald Blue Trust and just what they're about. Listen, I mean, we're living in unprecedented economic times right now, aren't we? I mean, it's just kind of crazy what's happening. But we had Don Christensen on from Ronald Blue Trust on the podcast last week. Want to recommend you go back and listen to that when we're finished, kind of providing advice and some encouragement on where you stand and where we should stand as far as our financial situations. And that's what Ronald Blue Trust is about. Their advisors apply biblical wisdom and technical expertise to help clients make wise financial decisions, experiencing clarity and confidence, and leaving a lasting legacy. Keywords there to me, biblical wisdom. That's what they're based upon, and that's why we love Ronald Blue Trust. And right now, listen, we're in unprecedented economic times, but Ron Blue is here to help. Check him out at ronblue.com, ronblue.com, Ronald Blue Trust. If you have a question, reach out. If you're just trying to find out more about what they're all about as far as retirement, charitable giving strategies, taxes, estates and trust, financial planning, that's what Ronald Blue Trust is about. Check them out over at ronblue.com, ronblue.com. We're going to get back to our conversation with Greg Stier from Dare to Share right now, but just want to preface this. It's going to sound a little different. And the reason is we talked to Greg Stier in the first part of our interview just a couple days ago to talk about the pandemic and the great work they're doing with the new Life in 6 Words app and how that app can now help people who are social distancing in the time and unprecedented sort of world that we're living in right now. But initially, Greg and I sat down back in February to tape a podcast, to tape an interview for the radio show. And in essence, that interview, the second part of that is being run right now. So it's going to sound a little different. It's in person. It's always better, I think, when you can tape an interview with a person face to face. Just like it is sharing your faith, right? But just so you're aware, this part of the interview going forward from right now was recorded prior to the coronavirus outbreak, in case you're wondering, why are we talking about certain things this way versus that way? This is the reason. So take a listen to our conversation, the second part of our conversation with Greg Stier from Dare to Share. Tell us your journey to faith, because you didn't just grow up in a Christian home and everything was perfect and you came to Christ at a young age and got baptized and everything was great. It was a little different.
Yeah, my family, as I always say when I preach, I don't come from a typical religious church-going, pew-sitting, hymn-singing family.
Right.
I come from a family filled with bodybuilding, tobacco chewing, beer-drinking thugs. And that's just the women. I mean, it's sadly. But
right.
Really, three of my uncles were competitive bodybuilders. The fourth one was a bouncer at the toughest bar in Denver, the Silver Dollar Bar and Grill. My fifth uncle was a Golden Gloves boxer and judo champion. My mom was the only girl in the group, and they were all afraid of her. And we were kind of known. I mean, the Denver Mafia, the Small Dones, had nicknamed my uncles the Crazy Brothers. So when the Mafia thinks your family's dysfunctional, it's not good. Yeah. And we were raised in what was at the time the highest crime rate area in Denver. And my family had something to do with that crime rate. There was so much violence in our home. I mean, I can joke about it now, but as a kid, I was traumatized. I was scared to death of my neighbors because I lived in a high crime rate area, and I was scared to death of my own family. And it was a terrifying childhood. But then a preacher from the suburbs whose nickname was Yankee, even though he spoke with a southern accent. This sounds, every time I say it, it sounds totally made up. Right? Yankee is actually still alive, and he's a pastor down in Tampa, Florida right now.
That's funny.
But Yankee planted a church in Arvada, Colorado, and his dad, this side note, his dad was a counterfeiter from the backwoods of Georgia. So he was born on the run in Pennsylvania. So his dad nicknamed him Blank Yankee.
Oh, gosh.
So he kept that title his whole life and still has it, right? So he planted a church. There was a guy named Bob Daly that went to Yankee's church that knew my family, was raised with my family, was too afraid to share the gospel with my family. So he dared Yankee. He said, I want you to reach Jack Matthias. Jack was the toughest one of my uncles, in and out of jail his whole life. Once for choking two cops out at the same time. He spent time in like the prison for the criminally insane, like the Colorado Mental Institute. I mean, he was like just crazy, and he loved fighting. He lived in violence was a part of it. So Yankee goes to his door. There was no ask, admire, admit. He just knocked on his door. He says, I'm here on a dare from Bob Daly to tell you about Jesus. Well, at the same time, my cousins, Tammy and Jackie, were going to youth group at Yankee's church. So he led with, Hey, and by the way, your daughters are two of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen. They're so sharp. You've got to be so proud. Well, that melted my Uncle Jack's heart. He said, "All right, I'll give you 5 minutes to kind of share." And so in that 5 minutes, which probably turned to 10 or 15, he shared the gospel with my Uncle Jack. And my Uncle Jack had always heard religion, turn, try, cry, and figured, I'm going to hell. There's no hope for me.
No chance. Yeah.
When he heard Christ died for him, it was an awakening. And so Yankee said, "Does that make sense?" And my Uncle Jack, he talked like this. He goes, "Hell yeah." That was a sinner's prayer, was hell yeah. He trusted Christ as his Savior. And I remember the transformation because he all of a sudden went from street fighting to street preaching.
Yeah.
Man, it was going into different, he went into a Mormon church on a Sunday morning, laid the gospel in a newcomer Sunday school class. He brought 250 people out to church in 1 month, mostly like street fighters, weightlifters, powerlifters, right? But he got a hold, Christ got a hold of him, and then he just would not stop. So he trusted Christ, and my Uncle Bob came to Christ. And I remember just as a kid watching my family fall like steroid-filled dominoes, bum, 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 and realizing the power of the gospel to change lives. And so from the time I was a kid, I knew I wanted to be a preacher because I saw how it transformed my entire family.
Wow, that's so cool. And I love that because it's literally radical transformation. We're talking about a family that it was like the last people you probably imagine seeing, right, come to Christ.
It's like Sons of Anarchy.
Yes,
to Christ.
yeah.
Totally.
I've seen that show, and that's what I was thinking when you're explaining it. I'm like, that's like the Sons of Anarchy, all this, as you say, dropped like dominoes into a relationship with Jesus. What happens then? Like, as they start all coming to Christ, are you suddenly turning into just the evangelist family?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. I mean, and then sometimes my family, there was that line when they came to Christ. If you didn't take Jesus, they may give you Moses upside the head. I mean, like a little bit of that going on. Yeah. Conversion by coercion, and but they were so passionate. They wanted everybody to know. I remember my Uncle Jack came to Christ. He went to the meatpacking place where he worked the next day, led another bodybuilder named Thumper to Christ. Thumper was a big Italian dude. He's like, "You got to tell my whole family this." Went over his house every night for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And led the whole family to Christ. The 12-year-old son is now one of my best friends, Donnie Coxey. Radically transformed by my Uncle Jack. My Uncle Jack only knew Ephesians 2:8 and 9, but that was enough for him to clearly articulate the gospel.
Amazing.
And it's just things like that. When you're a kid and you watch that, you can't help but say, "This is the most powerful thing on the planet." And I never knew my biological father. I was a one-night kind of stand. My mom, never, she was kind of a partier.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I have a heavenly Father, and I have an earthly mission, and I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and I've not looked back since.
I was talking to you before the interview. I love your story, by the way, Greg. Greg Stier is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. We were talking about just your connection to sports. And I have a couple questions I think that we can ask about sports and evangelism.
Yeah.
But your background in sports, and you're telling us a story about your basketball playing days, we'll just say, and how that turned into an evangelistic opportunity, which I kind of shook my head at. Really? Tell that story.
So Yankee started a Christian school, so I wanted to go. There's only like 18 students there when it started. I was like, "Mom, please let me go," and begged her into it, and she sent me to Christian school, and a couple years in, they started a basketball team. Well, I'm extremely competitive, yet highly uncoordinated. So the harder I try, the worse I get. It's just sad. In our team, whenever we were up by 30 points or down by 30 points and there was like a minute to go, the crowd would start cheering Stier, because it was just sad to watch. But one of the things I loved about this Christian school is they were serious about evangelism. So 1 minute left in every game, we would save one timeout. Coach would call the timeout, bring us together, pass out gospel tracts to all of us. We would put gospel tracts, pamphlets in our, high socks back in the 80s, short shorts and high socks. And then when the game was over, we would share Christ with the person that we were defending the whole game. And we mostly paid Christian schools, but it was surprising to me how many teenage boys we were able to lead to Christ playing basketball on the court. And it was kind of weird and awkward, but at first, but then we got into a conversation.
How are you doing that though? Like, are you waiting for the game to end, and then, or are you literally on the court talking to these guys about?
No,
Jesus?
the game was done as soon as it, the final buzzer.
Yeah.
We would start. Hey, I've been meaning to tell you, and we'd pull the sweaty gospel track out of our sock and give it to them and share Christ. And you know what? Some people say, well, that's an ineffective way. And I'm like, you know what? What's your way of doing it? It's like D.L. Moody. Somebody said, I don't like your way of evangelism. He said, well, what's your way of evangelism? Right. Well, I don't have a way of evangelism. He goes, well, I like my way better than your non-way. Right?
Yeah.
And, maybe not the most effective, but it was effective enough that we saw. I think almost any method can be somewhat effective if you're loving and kind to people. Mm-hmm. And if you don't look at them as a project, but you're genuinely sharing good news.
So what's the problem that's existing right now in your eyes in terms of people receiving that good news? Are people who are trying to share the good news not equipped or not? 1 Peter 3:15 says we're supposed to be prepared to give a reason for the hope that's within us, do it with gentleness and respect. Are we losing that aspect of it? What's the problem right now, you think?
Well, I think you either have one side is, well, I just live the gospel, right? I just live it. And that's like having a one-winged airplane, right? Yeah. You ain't going anywhere, just living it, right? But then you have on the other side the ones that give it, but they give it almost like my daughter and I, we were going down an escalator, and there was a guy at the bottom of the escalator who had a repent sign and a bullhorn. He was screaming at everybody that they're going to go to hell. And my daughter, who was 12 at the time, she said, Dad, I think your way is more effective of just talking to people. I go, well, you got to give the guy an A for effort.
Sure.
But an F on strategy, right? And you can talk to people out in public, but talk to people. Not through people. And don't start with sin. That's why we start the gospel with God created us to be with him. God loves us. Yeah. The classic verse, the ultimate example of evangelism, Jesus to Nicodemus, for God so loved the world. And I think we live in a world that doesn't sense love, but when they understand, man, your creator loves you. As got matter of fact, so much that his heart is broken by your sins. So much, though, that he sent his son to take that sin upon himself, so that through simple faith, not turn, try, cry, trust and believe in him, and you're back into that relationship. So I think we need to really work on the way that we communicate.
We've seen a couple of events that we've covered recently. I say we because John Ackerman's in here in the room, and so is Jacob House, both with PAO and Sports Spectrum. And John and I have been at a couple events recently, especially the Super Bowl. And that's where I call them the big dogs come out, and the bullhorns and the big signs, because they know that there's a large amount of people conveying into a small place. They're all going to be walking across the convention center. They're all going to be walking by, the big game and the stadium. So that's a place for them to reach out. So you're not necessarily against going and being at a place where there's 70,000 people.
I do it. I go out. I lead a ministry called Dare to Share. Right, and so every one of our Dare to Share events, we do a thing called Dare to Share Live, 125 cities across the United States, 10/10/2020, and on October 10th, 2020, guess what? We're going to take 2.5 hours. We're going to go out, and we're going to serve people, and we're going to share the gospel. So I have no problem with that. What I got a problem with is when you are communicating the best news on the planet, like you've been baptized in lemon juice. It's called good news. That's what the word gospel means. It's not bad news. I go up to those guys sometimes. I went to one guy who's screaming, repent, you're all going to hell. I go, hey. How's it going with your faith sharing? He goes, I'm being persecuted for being a Christian. I go, you're being persecuted for being a jerk. You're not being persecuted for being a Christian. I said, why don't you try talking to people? He said, you don't judge me. And I'm like, okay, like you're judging everybody else who's walking down this. I go, dude, you're making it hard for the rest of us who are trying to actually love people into the kingdom. Yeah. And so, and I'm not one of those guys. I say, yeah, we bring up sin, we bring up judgment, but we do that in the context of starting and leading with love.
Yeah, that's what Jesus did.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good stuff. He is Greg Stier, daretoshare.org, that dare to share, the number 2 share. This is really great stuff. All right, so we got to ask you the question we ask all of our guests here on Sports Spectrum. What are you learning from God right now? What's he teaching you Greg Stier, in the season of life that you're in, where you are. I love the 10-10-20, you said?
10-10-2020, yeah.
2020, that's going to be a really cool event that we can keep an eye on and talk more about as we get closer. But what are you learning from God right now?
I'm learning that if you're faithful over the long term, that God will bring a harvest. And we've seen that this year. We're going on to our 30th year as a ministry and really starting to see some global impact. And so I just encourage you, whether you lead a ministry or you're being faithful with your family or with that small group that you're leading or whatever that ministry is God's placed you at, be faithful over the long term and you'll have no idea what God's going to do through you. But whatever you do, gospelize it.
Long term. It's such a foreign concept to us today because everything is so instantaneous and microwavable.
Yeah.
We don't think long term.
We serve a crock-pot God. That's the difference.
Yeah, we do. It's not a microwavable God. Listen, Greg Stier, great stuff, man. Thank you so much for being here on Sports Spectrum. The book is called Gospelize Your Youth Ministry. Again, the website, daretoshare.org. Thanks for joining us, man.
It's been great.
And many thanks to Greg Stier from Dare to Share for joining us on Sports Spectrum. Again, get that app, the Life in 6 Words app, Life in 6 Words. And it's really a great tool to help equip you, especially during these crazy times with the quarantine that's going on, to evangelize to others, to share with them out of love, always starting with love, but sharing with them the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's what we're called to do as believers, to love God and love others. And through loving others, we are called to tell them about our faith. We are called to share the gospel with them in a non-intrusive way that will allow them to look at this and then make a decision for themselves. My brother Chris shared the gospel with me 19 years ago in the back bedroom of his house, and I had the choice then to make at that point. Do I say yes or do I say no? Is this real or is it just a feeling? And the more I investigated, the more I said yes and started, kind of beginning this journey with Christ, the more I found out how real it was. And it's changed my life forever. And so for you, if you're struggling with sharing your faith with others, not being open about your faith, but sharing your faith with others, please go get the Life in 6 Words app. You will love it. Life in 6 Words. And many thanks again to Greg Stier for joining us on Sports Spectrum. We also want to thank our partners and sponsors on the program today, Ronald Blue Trust. Check them out at ronblue.com for all your financial planning needs. And definitely during these uncertain times, reach out to them, ask questions, try to figure out what the best approach is to going forward in your financial endeavors based upon where we are in the current climate. Check them out at ronblue.com. We also want to direct you to our website, sportspectrum.com, the home base for all of our content where sports and faith intersect and connect, sportspectrum.com. And then give us a follow on our social media pages, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And lastly, you can email me directly, jason@sportspectrum.com, if you have any ideas, any thoughts about this interview with Greg. Maybe you get the Life in 6 Words app and you have an experience, an encounter to share the gospel and somebody else responds. Man, I would love to hear that story. So please email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and please stay safe.